My brother left 4 kids at my house, saying just 1 hour, but he never came back. 12 years later, he showed up with my parents and a lawyer, accusing me of kidnapping them. When I slid an envelope to the judge, he was stunned and asked, "Do they know about this?" I replied, "Not yet." The air in the courtroom was thick enough to choke on. It smelled of old paper, floor polish, and an attention so palpable it felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. Across from me, my brother Vance sat beside his sharp-suited lawyer. Vance was dabbing at his eyes with a pristine white tissue, looking every bit the tragic, heartbroken father. My parents, Harriet and Winston, sat in the pew directly behind him. Their faces were a carefully composed mask of righteous sorrow. It was a perfect, sickening family portrait of grief, and all of it was aimed directly at me. "She preyed on his vulnerability," Vance's lawyer, Mr. Harlan, boomed. His voice was artificially deep, echoing off the imposing wood-paneled walls. "She systematically isolated his children, turned them against their own loving father, and took control of the family's significant assets, including the very home built by our client's own grandparents." He was talking about my home. The home where I had patched up thousands of scraped knees, read bedtime stories until my voice gave out, and cooked more spaghetti dinners than I could possibly count. My hands, resting on the polished oak table in front of me, clenched into white-knuckled fists. My own lawyer, the formidable Ms. Rosalind, placed a calming hand on my arm. She was a rock, an anchor of steady calm in this hurricane of manufactured lies. "She crafted a cruel and self-serving narrative," Mr. Harlan continued, pointing a dramatic, accusatory finger at me. "She claims that my client, in a moment of profound distress, abandoned his children. The truth, Your Honor, is that Ms. Genevieve here callously and calculatingly prevented him from having any contact for 12 long, agonizing years." A wave of disapproving murmurs rippled through the gallery. I could feel the dozens of eyes on me, the heavy weight of their judgment. I risked a glance back at my kids. My kids. Sitting in the front row. Callahan, my oldest, now a man of 20, had his jaw set so tight it looked like it was carved from granite. Blythe's eyes were filled with a fiery defiance that mirrored my own. Gideon and Odessa, my youngest, just looked terrified. Their small forms were huddled together. Ms. Rosalind stood slowly. Her movements were deliberate and confident. "Your Honor," she said, her voice clear and sharp, cutting through the noise like a surgeon's scalpel. "The narrative here is indeed a powerful one, but it is not the fiction Mr. Harlan is attempting to sell to this court." She picked up a simple, worn manila envelope from our table. It was not thick. It was not sealed with wax. But it held the undeniable weight of 12 years of truth. She did not open it. She simply walked it over to the court clerk, who then passed it up to the judge's bench. Judge Thompson, a woman with a reputation for missing absolutely nothing, picked up the envelope. She slid out a single item. A glossy photograph. Its bright, jarring colors were a stark contrast to the muted tones of the courtroom. She stared at it. Her famously impassive expression flickered for just a fraction of a second. Her gaze lifted from the photo, cold and piercing, and landed squarely on me. The entire room seemed to hold its collective breath. "Ms. Genevieve," she said, her voice low but carrying with an unmistakable authority to every corner of the silent room. "Do they know about this?" She gave a subtle nod toward my children. The question landed like a punch to the gut. This was it. The precipice. The point of no return. I looked at their faces. The 4 faces I had loved, nurtured, and protected for more than a decade, and my throat tightened into a painful knot. I leaned forward toward the microphone. My own voice was barely a whisper, but in the dead, suffocating silence, it sounded like a cannon shot. Not yet. But before I share the story that led to that exact moment, I want to take you back to the beginning. Let me tell you everything. I am Genevieve. I am 35 years old, and this is the story of how a single hour, and a single lie, changed the entire rest of my life. 12 years ago, I was not a guardian, a defendant, or anything remotely resembling a mother. I was 23 years old. I was a junior architect with a clean, crisp blueprint for a life that seemed bright, orderly, and perfectly clear. I had just been made lead on a small commercial project at my firm. It was a huge step, the kind of promotion that changes careers, and I was diligently saving every single spare penny from my salary for a prestigious graduate program in Chicago. My world was composed of clean lines, precise measurements, strict deadlines, and the quiet humming ambition of a young woman on the rise. Then came the storm. It was not just the literal storm that was lashing against the large windows of my small second-floor apartment that Tuesday afternoon. It was the storm that wore my older brother's face. I remember the squeal of tires on the wet asphalt. It was a raw, ugly sound that cut right through the rhythmic drumming of the rain. I glanced out the window to see Vance's beat-up sedan jerk to a stop at the curb, half on and half off the pavement. The driver's side door flew open, and he practically tumbled out into the downpour. His jacket was already soaked. He was not alone. He was pulling, dragging four small, struggling figures behind him. I threw my own door open just as he stumbled up the porch steps, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Vance, what in the world is going on? Are you okay?" He looked completely frantic. His eyes were wide and unfocused, darting around as if he expected to be ambushed by someone in the shadows. He shoved the kids toward me, pushing them into the relative dryness of my doorway. There was Callahan, a serious, solemn 8-year-old boy, clutching a soggy backpack as if it were a life raft. Blythe was 6, her knuckles bone-white as she gripped a worn, one-eyed teddy bear. Gideon was a tornado of 4-year-old energy, already trying to tug at my pant leg. And little Odessa, just 2 years old, was strapped into a stroller, her small face beet red from crying. "Just 1 hour, Genevieve," Vance said. His voice was quick and brittle, almost lost in the howl of the wind. "Please. I just need 1 hour. I swear I will be right back." He dropped a heavy, faded diaper bag at my feet. Its straps landed in a growing puddle with a sad splash. Before I could form a single coherent question about allergies, about what was so terribly wrong, about where in the world he was going, he turned and fled. "Vance, wait." I called out, my voice swallowed by the storm. "What about their dinner? Does Odessa need a specific formula? Anything?" But he was already scrambling back into his car. The engine roared to life, a desperate, angry sound that drowned out my words, and then he was gone. He fishtailed down the street, leaving a plume of gray exhaust hanging in the damp, heavy air. I stood there on the porch, completely stunned, with 4 pairs of confused, frightened eyes looking up at me. My architect's mind, a mind used to order, logic, and meticulous planning, felt like it was short-circuiting. This was not a problem you could solve with a ruler and a pencil. This was pure chaos. I herded them inside my apartment. My quiet, orderly sanctuary instantly became a whirlwind of wet jackets, muddy shoes, and pitiful whimpering. My brain, lacking any other framework, shifted into the only mode that made sense. Triage. I dried wet hair with bath towels. I warmed milk on the stove. I dug frantically through the diaper bag for snacks. The contents were a cruel joke. A few stale granola bars, a half-empty juice box, and a single, solitary spare diaper for Odessa. That was it. No change of clothes. No medicine. No comfort items. Absolutely nothing. 1 hour bled into 2. I tried calling his cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. I paced the length of my small living room, stepping over scattered crayons and wet socks. I dialed again. Voicemail. I left a message, my voice tight with forced calm. "Vance, it has been over 2 hours. Call me. The kids are asking for you." I sent a text. No reply. By midnight, the storm outside had settled into a steady, relentless drizzle. The storm inside my apartment had finally exhausted itself. All 4 children were asleep, a tangle of small limbs and restless dreams, crowded together under a single blanket on my pull-out couch. I sat by the window in the dark, watching the rain streak the glass. The reflection of a woman I barely recognized stared back at me. A woman who was suddenly, terrifyingly responsible. I pulled out the diaper bag one more time, searching for a clue, for anything tucked deep in a side pocket. My fingers found a crumpled piece of notebook paper. His hurried, spiky scrawl was barely legible under the dim light from the street lamp outside. I will be back soon. Thanks. No name. No explanation. Just that one chillingly vague word. Soon. As the long night deepened and the city outside grew silent, that word started to feel less like a promise and more like a massive lie. The first week was a blur of absolute improvisation and mounting dread. Soon never came. Vance's phone remained defiantly off. My increasingly frantic texts went unanswered. I would sit on the edge of my bed, staring at that single, damning check mark indicating the message was delivered but never read. The 1-hour favor had morphed into an indefinite prison sentence, and my old life, the one with the clear blueprint, was the primary casualty. The acceptance letter for the graduate program in Chicago was pinned to my corkboard in the kitchen. It was a crisp, white symbol of my future. I had stared at it every morning while drinking my coffee, feeling a thrill of anticipation. On the 8th day of Vance's deafening absence, I walked over to the board. I took the letter down, folded it with numb fingers, and placed it in a dark drawer. Chicago was a dream from another lifetime. My new reality was a 4-year-old who had night terrors about monsters, and a 6-year-old who would not let go of my hand even when I was trying to cook pasta on the stove. My most urgent call, the one I truly thought would bring the cavalry, was to my parents. I expected panic. I expected righteous anger. I expected a plan of action. What I received was a chilling, clarifying dose of the family dynamic I had spent my entire life trying to escape. "Oh, Genevieve," my mother, Harriet, sighed into the phone. Her voice was laced with that familiar, weary annoyance she reserved just for me. "You know how Vance is. He has always been so dramatic. He probably just needed to blow off some steam." I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white. "Blow off steam? Mom, it has been a week. He left 4 children on my doorstep with nothing but a handful of granola bars. This is not dramatic. This is abandonment. Do not you dare use that word," she snapped, her voice suddenly sharp as broken glass. "Your brother is going through a very hard time. His business deal fell through. He has a lot on his plate right now." There it was. The endless, flowing river of excuses for Vance. The golden child. The only son who could do no wrong. "Your father and I wired him some money last week. He will be fine." "What about the kids?" I pressed, my voice rising with absolute disbelief. "What am I supposed to do? Odessa is out of formula. Callahan missed 2 days of school. This is not a sustainable situation." I heard my father, Winston, muttering in the background. His voice was muffled, but his words were as clear as a bell. "Tell her to handle it. She is the aunt. That is her job." My mother came back on the line, her tone now brisk and dismissive. "Your father is right. Just handle it for now, honey. We are completely swamped with the planning for the hospital's charity gala this month. Just be a good sister. He will be back for them eventually." The line went dead. I stood there in my tiny kitchen, the phone pressed to my ear, the silence ringing louder than her words ever could. I was not just their daughter or their sister. I was their janitor. A convenient, reliable place to dump an inconvenient problem. No one was coming to help. No one was riding to the rescue. It was just me. That phone call was a brutal turning point. The faint, flickering hope I had that this was all a terrible mistake was extinguished. It was replaced by a cold, hard resolve. These kids had no one else. That resolve was tested severely just a few nights later. I was woken by a small, pathetic whimpering sound coming from the living room. It was Odessa. I stumbled out of bed and went to her, placing a hand on her forehead. She was burning up. A wave of pure, undiluted panic washed over me. I was a 23-year-old architect, not a doctor. I fumbled in the bathroom cabinet for the thermometer. It read 104 degrees. I bundled her up in a thick blanket. I frantically woke the other 3 sleepy, confused kids, told them to put their shoes on, and rushed everyone to the emergency room. The hospital was a blur of bright fluorescent lights, antiseptic smells, and the terrifyingly calm voices of the triage nurses. They hooked Odessa up to IN4. Her tiny body looked impossibly fragile in the center of the oversized hospital bed. The doctor, a kind woman named Dr. Evelyn Reed, examined her thoroughly. She turned to me with a reassuring but serious expression. "It was a severe febrile seizure," Dr. Reed said, looking at me with gentle but probing eyes. "We need to keep her overnight for observation. We need to contact her parents." "The mother is not in the picture, correct?" I stammered, shame and anger warring inside my chest. "And the father, he is unreachable." Her gaze softened significantly. "Okay then. You are the emergency contact." She handed me a heavy clipboard. I took a pen and began filling out the paperwork, writing my name, my number, and my signature on every single line. I made one last, desperate call to my mother from the waiting room hallway. "Mom, Odessa is in the hospital," I whispered, trying not to wake the other kids who were sleeping in the uncomfortable plastic waiting room chairs. "She had a seizure. The doctor says she is stable, but..." "Oh, for heaven's sake," Harriet's voice was sharp with sleep and extreme annoyance. "It is probably just a little fever. You are overreacting, Genevieve. Vance's children are always so dramatic. Just give her some medicine and put her to bed. Do not call me at 3 in the morning with this nonsense again." She hung up on me again. I sat there on the cold floor of the hospital corridor, the phone buzzing with the disconnected tone, and something deep inside me finally broke. It was not just that they would not help. It was that they fundamentally did not care. They did not care if their own grandchild was sick, suffering, or scared. Their allegiance was absolute, and it was to Vance, not to these children. The next morning, the sun felt harsh as I walked into the local elementary school office with Callahan. My exhaustion was a physical weight pulling at my limbs. The clerk behind the desk, a stern-looking woman with glasses perched on her nose, pushed a thick stack of forms toward me. "I need proof of guardianship. Birth certificates." "A notarized letter from the father," she listed off monotonously. My heart sank into my shoes. "I do not have a letter. Her father left in a hurry." The clerk's eyes softened slightly when she saw the hospital admission bracelet still tightly wrapped around my wrist. "Look," she said, lowering her voice so the other parents would not hear. "We have a form for temporary guardianship of record. It is for situations exactly like this. It will at least get him in school while you sort things out legally." I took the form. My hand was shaking as I filled it out. Under the line for relationship to child, I paused. I looked at Callahan, who was nervously twisting the strap of his backpack. I wrote aunt, but it felt like a massive lie. After the terrifying night I had just survived, after the absolute abdication of every other adult in their lives, I was already something much more. I pressed my name into the paper like a promise. The heavy thud of the date stamp on that form echoed in the quiet school office. Something inside me knew, even then, that this single piece of paper was more than just bureaucracy. It was the first piece of evidence. The first brick in a defensive wall I did not even know I was building. Years began to stack up. Each one was a testament to Vance's profound and unshakable silence. The seasons changed. The kids grew out of their clothes faster than I could buy them. My small, tidy apartment completely transformed from a minimalist bachelorette pad into a chaotic, loud, incredibly loving home. My architectural models were packed away, replaced by sprawling block castles. My pristine blueprints were covered in a fine layer of glitter and messy crayon drawings. My life was no longer my own. Every cent of my salary went to groceries, school supplies, and starting a meager college fund for the four of them. And in a strange, exhausting way, I was deeply grateful for it. But beneath the surface of our new, cobbled-together normal, I became a quiet, meticulous collector of truths. It was less a conscious legal strategy and more a gut instinct. A primal need to document the staggering injustice of it all. I never threw away that first crumpled note he left on the table. I kept every single letter that the kids and I sent to the last known address we had for Vance. Each envelope eventually came back, stamped with those cold, impersonal red words, "Return to sender." They formed a sad, thick stack in a shoebox hidden in the back of my closet. It was a monument to an entirely one-sided conversation. Our kindly next-door neighbor, Mrs. Gable, was a retired librarian with a mind like a steel trap. She stopped me by the wooden fence one afternoon while I was trying to untangle a kite from a rose bush. "You know, Genevieve," she said, lowering her voice conspiratorially, her sharp eyes twinkling behind her spectacles. "I never told you this because I felt it was not my place. But the night before your brother left those sweet babies with you, I saw something very odd." I stopped pulling at the tangled kite string. Odd? How? A very fancy car pulled up in front of his place. A black Mercedes. A woman in a very sharp suit got out. She handed him a thick manila envelope. It looked exactly like a stack of cash. He got in her car, and they drove off together. He came back an hour later in his own junk heap of a car, went inside for maybe 10 minutes, packed a bag, and then, well, you know the rest. An envelope of cash. A woman in a Mercedes. My stomach twisted into a sickening knot. This was not a desperate, broke father cracking under the immense pressure of poverty and single parenthood. This was a planned exit. A transaction. He had not run from a problem, he had been paid to start a new life. A few weeks later, while doing a deep, frantic clean of the hall closet to make room for Gideon's outgrown winter coats, I found it. The smoking gun that confirmed Mrs. Gable's story. At the very bottom of the old, forgotten diaper bag, tucked deep into a torn inner seam, was a folded, faded piece of paper. It was a receipt from a sleazy motel just off the interstate, dated the exact night before he disappeared. But it was not the date that made my blood run cold. It was the name signed for the room in a bold, feminine script. It was not Vance's signature. It was a woman's name, Nadine. He had not just left. He had left with someone. He had a partner in his escape. He had used a divorce from his responsibilities to run off with a new woman. I slipped the receipt, along with a carefully written, signed statement from Mrs. Gable, into the growing collection. I now kept everything in a sturdy, fireproof envelope. That envelope felt heavier than paper. It held the tangible, toxic weight of deceit. The children, meanwhile, were facing their own quiet, painful battles. Callahan, now in middle school, started getting into fights. One Tuesday afternoon, I got a dreaded call from the principal. Callahan had punched a boy in the cafeteria. The boy had been taunting him, saying his dad was a deadbeat loser who did not want him. When I got Callahan home, he sat on the edge of his bed. He was sullen, staring at the floor, his right eye already starting to swell and turn purple. I sat next to him, gently holding a bag of frozen peas to his bruised face. "You cannot solve problems with your fists, Callahan," I said softly, brushing his hair out of his eyes. He looked up at me. His eyes were filled with a profound pain that was far older than his young years. "Then how do you solve them?" He was not wrong, was he, Aunt Jen? He does not want us. The question hung in the heavy air of the bedroom like a poison dart. What could I say to a boy whose heart was broken by the one man who was supposed to protect it? I could not lie to him. But the truth was a sledgehammer. I do not know why he left, Callahan, I said, choosing my words with agonizing care. But I know it has absolutely nothing to do with you. You are wonderful. It is his loss. And I want you. I will always want you. You and me, Blythe, Gideon, Odessa. We are a team. We protect our own. I pulled him into a tight hug, and he finally cried. He sobbed into my shoulder until he fell asleep. From that day forward, that became our family mantra. We protect our own. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place during the painful, bureaucratic process of sorting through my grandparents' estate after they both passed away within a year of each other. The funeral was a tense, quiet affair. My parents mourned loudly, putting on a show for the community. I stood in the back with the kids, saying a quiet goodbye to the only two people in my family who had ever showed me genuine kindness. Their old house, a beautiful, rambling place with a wraparound porch, was now mine. It was a place filled with warm, golden memories of a kinder, simpler family life. But it was also a place filled with dense legal documents. Buried deep in their will, a document my parents had glossed over and entirely dismissed, was a specific clause I had never noticed before. It was dry, legalistic language, but when I read it sitting at my kitchen table late one night, it hit me like a shot of adrenaline. In the event of a dispute regarding the primary family residence, priority of residence and ownership will be granted unconditionally to the family member providing direct, continuous care to children of the bloodline. My grandparents, in their quiet, unassuming wisdom, had seen the deep fractures in our family long before they split wide open. They knew Vance was unstable. They knew who was reliable. They knew who actually showed up to do the hard work. They had reached out from beyond the grave and left me a massive shield. A legal fortress. I made a certified copy of that page immediately. I slid it into the fireproof envelope with the motel receipt, the returned letters, and Mrs. Gable's signed statement. I sealed it shut. The kids were teenagers now. Odessa called me Mom. Not by accident, not as a slip of the tongue, but as a simple, undeniable fact. Callahan was looking at colleges, dreaming of becoming an architect just like me. They did not remember a life before me. I had long ago stopped waiting for Vance to call. I had stopped being angry at the rain. I had simply become their mother. I genuinely thought the war was over. I thought we had survived the absolute worst of it. I did not realize the real war had not even begun. The knock on the door came on a crisp, perfectly normal Saturday afternoon in October. It was 12 years, almost to the exact month, since Vance had vanished into that rainstorm. The house was humming with the beautiful, ordinary noise of a life we had painstakingly built from the ashes of his abandonment. Callahan was in the living room, hunched over his laptop on the coffee table. His face was a mask of intense concentration as he filled out college applications. Blythe was strumming her acoustic guitar on the porch swing outside, a soft, hopeful melody drifting through the open screen window. Gideon and Odessa were engaged in a loud, laughing water balloon fight in the backyard, their joyful shrieks echoing through the quiet suburban neighborhood. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and walked to the front door, a smile on my face. I opened the door. And the noise, the music, the laughter, it all died instantly in my throat. There he was. Vance. He was glossy. That is the only word I could find to describe it. His hair was perfectly styled. He wore an expensive, tailored blazer and a watch that probably cost more than my car. The 12 years that had carved deep lines of worry and exhaustion into my face, the years of sleepless nights and stretching paychecks, had seemingly polished him to a high, unnatural shine. He looked wealthy, rested, and utterly unbothered. But he was not alone. Standing beside him, radiating an aura of smug, parental satisfaction, were my mother and father, Harriet and Winston. And flanking them, looking like a sleek, predatory shark scenting blood in the water, stood a man in a dark suit holding a thick leather briefcase. This was not a prodigal brother returning home with a repentant heart. This was an invading army standing on my front porch. Genevieve, my mother said. Her voice was dripping with a saccharine sweetness that instantly set my teeth on edge. Look who is finally here. Vance is back to make our family whole again. Vance's eyes slid right past me. His gaze was cool, calculating, and appraising. He did not look at the framed photos of his children lining the hallway wall. The photos that chronicled their entire lives, from gap-toothed elementary school grins to awkward teenage growth spurts. No. He looked at the original hardwood floors. He looked at the crown molding. He looked at the antique chandelier that had belonged to our grandmother. It was the distinct look of someone assessing property, assessing his inheritance, not a father looking for his home. "Hello, Genevieve," he said. His voice was entirely flat, devoid of any warmth, regret, or emotion. The man in the suit stepped forward, extending a hand that I had absolutely no intention of shaking. "Ms. Genevieve. I am Harlan. I am Mr. Vance's legal counsel. We are here today to begin the formal process of family reunification." The phrase sounded so clinical, so obscenely twisted, it made my stomach churn. I wanted to be sick right there on the welcome mat. From behind me, I heard footsteps. Callahan appeared in the hallway doorway. He was nearly as tall as Vance now. His young face hardened instantly into a mask of cold, unyielding fury. Outside on the porch, Blythe's guitar went completely silent with a discordant, ugly thud. "What do you want, Vance?" Callahan's voice was low. It was laced with a raw, visceral contempt that made me feel both intensely proud and utterly heartbroken. He did not call him Dad. Vance finally looked at his son. A quick flicker of annoyance crossed his perfectly groomed face. "I want my children back, of course. And I want my life back." Mr. Harlan cleared his throat, clearly taking center stage to perform. "We will be filing a petition for full and immediate custody of all 4 minors," he announced to the quiet street, his voice projecting as if he were already in a courtroom. "Furthermore, we will be petitioning the court for the immediate sale of this property, as it is part of the family inheritance to be divided equitably. My client has been wrongfully denied his rightful share of the family estate for far too long." The world tilted violently on its axis. The sale of our home. The inheritance. The custody. It all clicked into place in my mind with a sickening, heavy thud. This was never about the kids. He did not miss them. He did not want to be a father. It was entirely about the house. It was about the money. The kids were just the leverage. They were the key he needed to unlock the assets he felt entitled to. Harriet stepped forward, placing a proprietary, comforting hand on Vance's arm. It was a gesture of solidarity that felt exactly like a knife twisting in my gut. "Genevieve, this foolishness has gone on long enough. You have had your fun playing house, but it is time for this to end. Vance is their father. We have enabled your little fantasy for far too long." Enabled me. The word was a physical slap in the face. I had enabled them. I had solved their massive problem. I had raised their abandoned, terrified children. I had cleaned up his catastrophic mess, sacrificing my youth and my career to do it. And this was my reward. Absolute betrayal. Blythe stood up from the porch swing and walked to stand beside Callahan. Her eyes were blazing with a fire I knew all too well. "Playing house?" she demanded, her voice shaking with rage. "She raised us. Where were you? Where were any of you when Odessa had a fever so high she had a seizure in the middle of the night? Where were you on Christmas morning, or when Callahan made the honor roll?" "That is quite enough, young lady," my father, Winston, barked. It was the stern, cold voice he used to close ruthless business deals. "Show your father some respect." "He is not my father," Odessa's small voice piped up from behind my leg. She had run inside from the backyard and was now clinging to my jeans, her face pale and frightened. She pointed a trembling finger up at me. "She is my mom." The word hung in the humid afternoon air. An undeniable, unshakable truth. Vance flinched as if he had been physically struck. For the first time, a real crack appeared in his polished, wealthy facade. It was not a crack of remorse. It was not a crack of sadness. It was a crack of pure, unadulterated rage. "You see what she has done?" he hissed, turning violently to his lawyer. His voice was a venomous whisper. "She has poisoned them against me. This is textbook parental alienation. This is kidnapping. That is exactly what this is." The accusation was so vile, so incredibly twisted, so fundamentally untrue, it literally sucked all the oxygen from my lungs. Kidnapping. I pulled my children close to me, my arms forming a physical, protective shield around their shoulders. I looked at the 3 adults standing on my porch. These people shared my blood. They were supposed to be my family. But looking into their eyes, I saw absolutely nothing but strangers. Strangers who had come to my doorstep to burn my entire world to the ground. The heavy wooden door clicked shut. I turned the brass deadbolt, and the loud, metallic sliding sound echoed in the sudden silence of my hallway. My hands were shaking so violently that I dropped my keys. They hit the original hardwood floor with a sharp clatter. I leaned my back against the door, closing my eyes, trying to force air into my lungs. In the living room, the children were completely frozen. Callahan was standing by the coffee table, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. Blythe had left her guitar on the porch and was hugging her arms across her chest. Gideon and Odessa were staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. The safe, beautiful bubble of our family life had just been violently popped by the people who shared my blood. 2 days later, the real nightmare officially began. A man wearing a cheap gray suit knocked on my door just as I was pouring my morning coffee. He did not make eye contact. He simply handed me a thick, heavy manila envelope and walked away quickly. I sat down at the kitchen table. My coffee slowly turned cold as I pulled out the massive stack of legal documents. It was 50 pages of cold, sterile, and entirely fabricated legal warfare. There was a formal petition for full, immediate physical and legal custody of all 4 children. There was a separate, aggressively worded motion demanding the immediate forced sale of the house, claiming I was hoarding the family inheritance. And worst of all, there was a motion for an emergency restraining order against me. Vance and his lawyer, Mr. Harlan, claimed I was an unstable, manipulative influence who posed a severe psychological danger to the children. Every single sentence, every legal phrase, was a carefully crafted dagger designed to inflict maximum damage. They were painting me as a greedy monster who had stolen a fragile, grieving father's children just to live rent-free in a nice house. The days that followed were a descent into a very specific kind of hell. It was a nightmare where the truth simply did not matter. My own family, the people who were supposed to be my first line of defense in the world, became the chief architects of my destruction. The phone started ringing, and it absolutely would not stop. It was my aunts, my uncles, my cousins. People I had shared Thanksgiving dinners with for my entire life were all calling me with the exact same rehearsed, pitying script. My Aunt Carol called me on a Thursday evening. She had always been the cool aunt. She was the one who slipped me $20 on my birthday when I was a teenager and seemed to understand my desire to escape our family's suffocating dynamics. I picked up the phone, desperately hoping for an ally. Her voice was thick with a syrupy, fake sympathy. "Oh, Genevieve. This is just a terrible nightmare. I told Harriet she is being far too harsh on you. How are you holding up? And the poor children, what are they saying about all of this drama?" Like an absolute fool, blinded by a desperate need for comfort, I confided in her. I told her how scared the kids were. I told her how Callahan refused to even speak Vance's name. I told her how little Odessa was having nightmares again for the first time in years, waking up screaming that a bad man was taking her away. 2 hours later, my phone rang again. It was my mother, Harriet. I answered, and her furious screaming nearly deafened me. "How dare you let Callahan disrespect his father like that? Carol told me everything you said. You are actively encouraging this defiance. You are a sick, twisted woman, Genevieve. You are trying to ruin your brother. I felt the blood completely drain from my face. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. I had walked right into their trap. Aunt Carol was not an ally. She was a spy. She was a listening post in their highly coordinated attack. The smear campaign was not just confined to our family tree. It bled out into my professional life. I did freelance architectural design on the side to make ends meet, putting every extra dollar into a college fund for the 4 kids. I had recently secured a very promising, lucrative project designing a massive wraparound deck for a wealthy client in town. The salary from that job was going to cover our property taxes for the entire year. The morning after my mother sent a particularly vicious mass email to our extended family, my phone rang. It was the client. Genevieve, he said. His voice was incredibly awkward and strained. Look, I am so sorry, but we are going to have to go in a different direction with the deck project. With this incredibly messy custody battle, and the awful things we are hearing around town, it is just not a good look for us. We need to hire someone without all this personal drama. I stared at the wall, the phone feeling like a lead weight in my hand. I had lost the job. They were not just attacking my role as a mother. They were actively attacking my ability to provide food. They were trying to destroy my salary, trying to drain the kids' college fund, trying to make me too poor to fight them. They wanted to break me from every possible angle until I surrendered. That night, long after the children were asleep, I sat in the dark kitchen. The massive stack of legal documents sat on the table in front of me like a monument to their betrayal. I felt utterly and completely alone. I was drowning in a dark sea of lies. For a fleeting, desperate moment, my shoulders slumped. I put my head in my hands. I thought about giving up. Maybe it would be easier to just let them win. Let them force the sale of the house. Let them take the inheritance money. Maybe if I just walked away, the unbearable pain and the endless, vicious attacks would finally stop. Then, I lifted my head. Through the shadows of the hallway, illuminated by the pale moonlight shining through the window, I saw the wooden doorframe leading to the living room. I stood up and walked over to it. I ran my fingers over the chaotic ladder of pencil marks etched into the white paint. Each mark was dated in my messy handwriting. There was Callahan in the 5th grade. Blythe when she finally lost her 2 front teeth. Gideon when he learned to ride a bike. Odessa's very first time standing up on her own. Each tiny pencil mark was a vital piece of our shared history. It was a physical testament to 12 years of loud laughter, sudden fevers, school triumphs, and unconditional love. They were not just fighting for a house. They were trying to erase us. They were trying to declare to the world that these 12 years, my entire adult life, my complete sacrifice, meant absolutely nothing. A switch flipped deep inside my chest. The crushing exhaustion was still there, a bone-deep weariness that ached in my joints. But now, it was fused with a white-hot, diamond-hard rage. They had fundamentally underestimated me. My parents and my brother saw me as the quiet, reliable daughter. The dutiful younger sister. The one who would always silently clean up their catastrophic messes without a single complaint. They did not realize that a woman who has nothing left to lose but her children will fight like a cornered lioness. The very next morning, I picked up the phone and dialed the number for the best, most ruthless family law attorney I could find in the state. She was a woman named Ms. Rosalind, whose online reviews terrified people. They described her as a great white shark wearing a tailored skirt suit. Ms. Rosalind, I said when her sharp, professional voice answered the line. My name is Genevieve. My family is trying to take my 4 children and my home. They think I am going to roll over and die quietly. They are about to find out exactly how wrong they are. My first meeting with Ms. Rosalind was in her stark, modern office overlooking the busy city center. It smelled like expensive espresso and intimidating power. She was a no-nonsense woman with dark, sharp eyes that seemed to see right through polite social facades and straight down to the raw nerves underneath. I sat in the leather chair across from her expansive glass desk. I did not cry. I did not shake. I laid out the entire, sordid story, starting from the rainy afternoon Vance arrived on my porch, to the brutal declaration of war on my doorstep. When I finished speaking, I pushed the worn, fireproof manila envelope across the smooth glass. "This is everything," I said, my voice steady. "Every single returned letter. Every doctor's bill with my name on it as the only emergency contact. Every school form. The will from my grandparents regarding the house. And this." I pointed a finger at the faded motel receipt. Ms. Rosalind opened the envelope. She examined the contents with the methodical, cold precision of a surgeon. She read Mrs. Gable's signed statement. She scrutinized the highlighted copy of my grandparents' will, a small, grim smile touching the corners of her lips. Her expression remained mostly neutral, but I saw a distinct flicker of something incredibly predatory in her dark eyes when she carefully unfolded the motel receipt with the name Nadine signed on the bottom line. "This is exceptional, Genevieve," she said. Her voice was crisp and entirely devoid of false sympathy, which I appreciated more than anything. "This establishes a clear, undeniable pattern of behavior and a premeditated intent to abandon. Their entire case, driven by Mr. Harlan, is built on emotional manipulation, hearsay, and outright lies. Our case will be built on a foundation of cold, hard, irrefutable facts." For the first time in weeks, a sharp, bright sliver of hope cut through the suffocating fog in my mind. We spent the next few weeks existing in the eye of the storm, preparing meticulously for the brutal legal battle ahead. Ms. Rosalind's legal team was a well-oiled machine. They deposed absolutely everyone. They spoke to Dr. Evelyn Reed, the pediatrician who had treated the children for the last decade. She provided 12 years of meticulously kept medical records. She confirmed under oath, without a shadow of a doubt, that she had never once met or spoken to Vance. My name, and only my name, was on every single medical file as the primary caregiver. They spoke to the principal at the high school, who provided thick folders of attendance records for every single parent-teacher conference. I had never missed one. Not even when I had the flu. I called my old colleague and dear friend, Maria. She had been my rock during those first few chaotic years, a constant source of support when I thought I was going to completely break down. "Of course I will testify, Genevieve," Maria said over the phone, her voice warm and fiercely loyal. "I will march right into that courtroom and tell them how I found you asleep at your drafting table, still in your work clothes, with a baby monitor in your lap. I will tell them you had been up all night with a sick kid and still managed to meet the deadline for your promotion the next day. Let Harriet and Winston try to call that playing house. But the real turning point, the massive earthquake that completely changed the entire trajectory of the game, came on a rainy Tuesday night. It was very late. The house was completely quiet. I was sitting at the kitchen table, going over years of detailed bank statements with Ms. Rosalind on speakerphone. We were painstakingly tracking every single dollar of my modest salary, proving exactly how I had paid the property taxes, the grocery bills, and the maintenance for the house. We were building an impenetrable defense against Vance's ludicrous claim that I was somehow hoarding his inheritance money. Suddenly, my cell phone vibrated. An unknown number from a different state flashed on my screen. I almost ignored it, assuming it was just another hostile relative calling to harass me into surrendering. "I need to take this, Ms. Rosalind." "Give me 1 second, I said. I switched over to the incoming call. "Hello? This is Genevieve." There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the sound of traffic in the background. "Is this Genevieve?" a woman's voice asked. She sounded incredibly hesitant, her voice laced with a deep, weary bitterness. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Nadine. You do not know me. But I used to date your brother, Vance. A long, long time ago." The name clicked in my memory with the sheer, explosive force of a gunshot. Nadine. The name signed on the sleazy motel receipt. The woman in the black Mercedes. I heard through some old mutual friends what he is trying to do to you right now, Nadine continued. Her voice was filled with a palpable, heavy disgust. Let me guess. He is playing the tragic victim. He is crying about how you stole his perfect life from him, and he just wants his family back. That is exactly the general idea, I said. My heart was starting to pound violently against my ribs. Yeah. That is his signature move. A total divorce from reality, she laughed, but it was a dry, humorless sound. He did the exact same thing to me. We ran off together. He promised me the world. Then he drained my savings, left me with a mountain of massive credit card debt, and told all our mutual friends I was an abusive, crazy monster. Look, I really do not want to get involved in your toxic family drama. I have spent years trying to scrub him out of my life. But I cannot stand by and watch him do this to you and those poor kids. I remember how he talked about them. He was so incredibly proud of getting away. I gripped the edge of the kitchen table, my knuckles turning white. What do you mean, Nadine? I have something you need to see, she said. He sent it to me about a month after he dumped those kids on your porch. He was drunk. He was bragging about his amazing new life without burdens. I kept it all these years. I do not know why. Maybe some part of my brain knew that one day, someone would desperately need definitive proof of the monster he really is. My hand was shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone to my ear. What is it? It is a video, she said, her voice dropping incredibly low and serious. And I think it is going to win your entire case. We met the very next day. I drove 3 hours to a quiet, anonymous roadside diner halfway between our two cities. The diner smelled like stale cooking grease, old coffee, and strong disinfectant. Nadine was a tired-looking woman in her late 30s. She wore a faded waitress uniform. The heavy ghost of Vance's recklessness still clearly haunted the dark circles under her eyes. She did not say much when I slid into the vinyl booth across from her. She just reached into her purse and handed me a small, black plastic flash drive. He ruined a massive portion of my life, she said, her gaze distant, staring out the greasy diner window at the highway. Do not let him ruin yours. Or theirs. She stood up, threw a $5 bill on the table for her coffee, and walked out without another word. That night, after the kids were sound asleep, after the house was finally perfectly quiet, I took a deep breath. I plugged the black flash drive into the side of my laptop. My hands trembled as I used the mouse to click on the single video file stored on the drive. And then, his face filled my screen. It was Vance. 12 years younger. His face was deeply flushed with alcohol. His eyes were glittering with a manic, cruel, incredibly selfish energy. He was standing in a crowded, noisy bar. The sound quality was terrible, tiny and distorted by the loud thumping music in the background, but his words were crystal clear. I watched it 3 times. The things he said. The way he laughed. The absolute, chilling lack of humanity in his eyes. These were the exact words that would become the epicenter of the massive earthquake about to shatter our world. The first day of the custody hearing was a masterclass in theatrical, disgusting deception. The courtroom was imposing, filled with polished mahogany and an atmosphere of severe judgment. Mr. Harlan put Vance on the witness stand first. Vance delivered a performance completely worthy of a major acting award. He wore a slightly oversized suit to make himself look thinner, more fragile. He wept openly as he described his crippling, desperate depression after his wife left him. His voice cracked perfectly as he told the court he had only intended to leave the children with me for a few hours to clear his head, to gather his thoughts, and had returned that evening to find the locks changed. She would not let me back in. Vance sobbed, pointing a trembling, accusing finger directly at me. Every single time I tried to call, she would hang up. She told me I was a worthless, unfit father. She told me the children were much better off without me. She stole my beautiful babies from me, Your Honor. She stole my life. It made me physically nauseous to watch him lie so effortlessly. My parents followed him to the stand. They acted as a well-rehearsed chorus of corroboration. My mother, Harriet, spoke of Vance's fragile mental state, producing old, out-of-context journals from his teenage years as fake proof of his lifelong struggles. My father, Winston, wearing his most expensive tailored suit, spoke with solemn, heavy gravity about how I had taken advantage of the family's inheritance. He claimed I was living in the large family house rent-free for 12 years while my poor, heartbroken brother struggled to survive on the streets. It was a beautiful, compelling, and utterly repulsive fiction. Then Mr. Harlan called his surprise witness. A woman named Jessica Price, whose vaguely familiar face I finally placed as one of Vance's old partying friends from his 20s. She placed her hand on a Bible and swore under oath that she had personally been with Vance on multiple occasions when he had driven to my house, begging to see his children, only to be turned away at the door by me. She stood right there on the porch, Jessica said, looking directly up at Judge Thompson with wide, sincere, completely lying eyes. Genevieve told him he was a complete disgrace and was never welcome near those kids again. It was a blatant, outrageous lie. A complete fabrication bought and paid for. But it was her word against mine. I watched Judge Thompson's face. She was listening intently. I saw the tiny flicker of doubt in the judge's sharp eyes. The narrative Mr. Harlan was spinning was powerful. A struggling, loving father ruthlessly shunned by his cold-hearted, greedy sister. We were losing the emotional war. Ms. Rosalind's cross-examination was brilliant. She aggressively poked massive holes in their fake timelines. She highlighted their complete lack of any physical evidence, any police reports, any phone records to back up their claims. But the emotional damage in the room was already done. We left the courthouse that afternoon under a heavy, suffocating cloud of despair. That night was the longest night of my entire life. I sat in the dark living room, staring out the window at the street lamp. I was holding the small black flash drive tightly in the palm of my hand. The plastic felt warm from my skin. It felt both impossibly light and unbearably heavy. It was the absolute key to my salvation. It was the weapon that would win the war. But I also knew, with terrifying certainty, that it was the key to my children's permanent heartbreak. Could I actually do it? Could I detonate this massive bomb in the very middle of their lives? By playing this video, I would be brutally destroying whatever fragile, idealized, secret image of their father they still clung to in the deep corners of their hearts. I would be proving to them that they were truly, completely unwanted. I heard a soft creak on the floorboards. Callahan found me sitting there at 2 a.m. He was a tall, silent shadow in the dark room. He sat down on the sofa next to me. "We are losing, are we not?" he asked. His voice was completely flat, devoid of any youthful emotion. I looked at him. My handsome, brilliant, wounded boy. I could not lie to him. Not ever again. "It is not looking good, Callahan. They are telling a very convincing story." He looked down at my closed hand. At the small piece of plastic resting in my palm. He did not ask what it was. He was incredibly smart, he just knew it was something major. "Whatever you have to do, Mom," he said. The word Mom felt incredibly grounding. His voice was hard, filled with a maturity no 20-year-old should ever have to possess. "Do it. We can handle it. Blythe, Gideon, Odessa, me. We are so tired of the lies. End it." If you have made it this far, please do me a favor, like the video, and comment number 1 down below. It lets me know how awesome you are and shows that you are right here with me on this journey. Your support is a massive encouragement and truly motivates me. Drop that one so I can recognize you, and now, let us get back to my story. The next morning, the atmosphere in the courtroom was even more tense, pulling tight like a piano wire about to snap. Mr. Harlan formally rested his case. He walked back to his table with a smug, highly confident smile playing on his lips. He looked at Vance and nodded. Ms. Rosalind stood up slowly. She smoothed her skirt. "The defense calls Nadine to the stand," she announced clearly. A loud murmur went through the room. Vance's head snapped up so fast I thought he would break his neck. The fake, tragic sorrow instantly drained from his face, leaving behind a mask of chalky white, absolute panic. Nadine walked down the center aisle and took the witness stand. She looked weary, but her jaw was set with resolute determination. She swore her oath, her eyes never once straying toward Vance. "Nadine," Ms. Rosalind began, her pacing slow and deliberate. "How exactly do you know the petitioner, Mr. Vance?" "We dated 12 years ago. We left this city together the night he abandoned his children," she stated, her voice echoing clearly. Mr. Harlan shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly. "Objection. Relevance. This woman is an ex-girlfriend from over a decade ago speaking about ancient history. It is the single most relevant piece of evidence in this entire case, Your Honor," Ms. Rosalind countered immediately, her voice ringing with absolute conviction. "It speaks directly to the petitioner's true state of mind and his actual, documented intentions regarding his children at the exact time of the alleged abandonment." Judge Thompson's eyes narrowed. She fixed her gaze firmly on Vance, taking in his sudden panic. "I will allow it. Proceed, counsel. Did you remain in contact after he left you in massive debt?" Ms. Rosalind asked. "He sent me one final video message about a month after we left," Nadine said, her voice steady and clear. "Play the video," Judge Thompson ordered. The courtroom technician walked forward and took the small black flash drive from Ms. Rosalind's outstretched hand. A large, white projector screen was slowly lowered from the high ceiling. For a long, incredibly tense moment, the screen was blank. The only sound in the enormous room was the low, electric hum of the projector machine warming up. Then, an image violently flickered to life. It was a noisy, crowded bar. The kind of cheap place with sticky floors, neon beer signs, and loud, thumping music. The camera work was shaky, clearly filmed holding an old cell phone. And there he was. Vance. 12 years younger. His face was flushed red with alcohol. A wild, careless, deeply arrogant grin was plastered across his face. He was laughing uproariously, shouting over the loud music directly into the camera lens. "My kids," he slurred loudly. The audio was tinny, but his terrible words were horrifically clear. A cruel, utterly dismissive smirk played heavily on his lips. "Oh, God, no. I am so done with all that garbage. The diapers and the whining and the crying and the no sleep. Not for me, baby. I am absolutely not built for that miserable life." He took a long, greedy sip from a brown beer bottle, gesturing expansively with his free hand. "My boring sister, Genevieve, she can handle them. She is good at that domestic, responsible stuff. She has no life anyway. Me? I just need to force the sale of the house. I just need my inheritance money to live my life. My real life. The one that is just starting right now." He raised his glass directly toward the camera, a triumphant, chilling smile on his face. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated selfishness. To freedom, he yelled over the music. And to absolutely never changing another filthy diaper again. The video abruptly ended. The large screen went pitch black. But his words, his cruel laughter, his absolute disdain, hung heavily in the air. They echoed repeatedly in the dead, absolute, suffocating silence of the courtroom. It was a silence so profound, so incredibly heavy, it felt like a physical presence crushing the breath out of everyone in the room. Every single eye in the gallery was fixed directly on Vance. His face was a mask of sheer, unmitigated horror. Behind him, my mother, Harriet, had both hands clamped tightly over her mouth. Her body was trembling uncontrollably, rocking back and forth in the wooden pew. My father, Winston, looked like he had been physically turned to stone. His face was a grotesque, pale sculpture of complete disbelief. The terrible spell was finally broken by a single, choked sob. It came from the front row. It was Blythe. Tears were streaming rapidly down her face, silent and entirely devastating. Callahan wrapped a strong, protective arm tightly around his sister's shoulders. His own face was a grim, shattered canvas of intense pain and absolute vindication. Gideon and Odessa were holding hands, staring at the blank screen. The camera, the fake tears, the depositions, the expensive lawyer, the massive web of lies. They all melted away into nothing. All that was left in that room was the raw, brutal, undeniable truth. And the 4 innocent children who had just been violently forced to witness it. Judge Thompson's severe gaze fell on me. Her expression was completely unreadable, but her voice, when she finally spoke, was quiet, heavy with the massive weight of the terrible moment that had just unfolded. Ms. Genevieve, she said, the formal title sounding incredibly strange and new in the thick silence. Do they know about this? I looked deeply at my children. My beautiful, broken, incredibly resilient children. And the terrible truth I had tried so desperately hard to shield them from for 12 years, the truth that had now been laid bare for all the world to finally see, could no longer be hidden. My voice was thick with unshed tears, but I spoke clearly into the microphone. Not until today, Your Honor. The silence that followed my answer was the loudest thing I have ever heard in my life. It was the distinct, shattering sound of a family breaking into a million irreparable, jagged pieces. It was the sound of 12 years of carefully constructed, malicious lies collapsing into a pathetic pile of ash and dust. Vance did not even try to deny it. He absolutely could not. He just sat there, physically shrunken in his expensive chair. The glossy, highly confident, wealthy veneer had been violently stripped away, revealing the ugly, selfish, pathetic core rotting underneath. Mr. Harlan, for the very first time in his long, loquacious legal career, was entirely speechless. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. He aimlessly shuffled a stack of papers on his table as if a magic rebuttal might be hidden somewhere between the lines. There was nothing. Judge Thompson picked up her heavy wooden gavel. It came down, not with a sharp crack, but with a heavy, final, resonating thud that seemed to shake the very physical foundations of the room. This court, she began, her voice ringing with an authority that was absolute, furious, and chilling. This court has heard 2 profoundly different stories over the past 2 days. One story presented was of a struggling, loving young father tragically separated from his beloved children by a cruel, greedy, and manipulative sister. She paused, her eyes sweeping over Vance, Harriet, and Winston with a look of such undisguised, blistering contempt that it made them physically recoil in their seats. The other story was of a young woman who sacrificed her youth, her career ambitions, her salary, and her own future to raise 4 small children that were abandoned on her doorstep like unwanted luggage. It is now abundantly, painfully, and sickeningly clear to this court exactly which one of those stories is the truth. She pointed a finger directly at Vance. The video evidence provided is absolutely unequivocal. This was not a tragic moment of weakness, Mr. Vance. This was not a desperate cry for help from a grieving man. This was a clear declaration of intentional, highly calculated, and celebratory abandonment. You did not want these children until you realized they were the key to an inheritance. She then turned her sharp gaze to me. And for the very first time since this nightmare began, I saw the hard lines of her face soften. I saw a profound, human understanding. Ms. Genevieve, the judge said softly. What you have done over the last 12 years is nothing short of heroic. You did not play house, as your mother so callously stated under oath. You built a home. You built it with deep love, incredible stability, and an unwavering dedication that is frankly awe-inspiring. This court recognizes you not as an aunt, not as a temporary guardian, but as the true, legally binding, and only mother these 4 children have ever known. The powerful words washed over my tired body. It was a massive wave of validation so strong it almost buckled my knees. 12 years of being the quiet one. The responsible one. The one who just handled the mess. Finally, someone saw it. Someone understood the massive weight I had carried. Therefore, she declared loudly, her voice rising with absolute, righteous power. This court finds as follows. Full and permanent legal and physical custody of Callahan, Blythe, Gideon, and Odessa is granted solely and irrevocably to Ms. Genevieve. Vance let out a strangled, pathetic gasp, putting his head down on the table. A restraining order is hereby issued immediately against the petitioner, Mr. Vance, for a period of 10 years. Any potential for future contact will be mediated exclusively through this court, and only after extensive psychological therapy and evaluation. Judge Thompson shifted her gaze directly to my stunned parents sitting in the gallery. Furthermore, she continued, her voice turning to ice. The petition to force the sale of the family residence is denied with extreme prejudice. The clause in the grandparents' will is crystal clear. That home unconditionally belongs to the children and their primary caregiver. This court affirms that Ms. Genevieve and the children are the sole, rightful legal owners. Mr. Vance has no claim to that property or any inheritance tied to it. This matter is permanently closed. The finality of the gavel striking the wood the second time was like a starting gun. The courtroom instantly erupted into a massive maelstrom of loud whispers and gasps. The court reporter was typing frantically. Vance completely crumpled. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. His sobs were real now. But they were not the tears of a heartbroken father. They were the ugly, desperate, highly selfish sobs of a loser who realized he was leaving with absolutely nothing. No kids. No house. No money. I felt a strong hand grip mine under the heavy oak table. It was Callahan. He squeezed my hand so incredibly hard it hurt my knuckles, but it was a vital anchor in the swirling sea of overwhelming emotion. Blythe was still crying, but through her tears, she was smiling at me. A watery, incredibly triumphant smile. We gathered our things and walked out of the courtroom. We were a united, unbreakable front of 5. As we pushed through the heavy wooden double doors and stepped out into the echoing, cold marble hallway of the courthouse, a frantic, highly desperate voice called my name. Genevieve. Wait. Please, just wait. It was my mother, Harriet. She and my father, Winston, were hurrying toward us. Their faces were extremely pale and desperate. The smug masks of righteous indignation they had worn for months were completely gone, replaced with pure, unadulterated panic. Genevieve, please, we need to talk about this, Harriet pleaded, reaching a shaking hand out to grab my arm. Her touch felt entirely alien to my skin. We did not know. You have to believe us. We had absolutely no idea he would say those awful things in that video. We thought he just needed help. I looked at her hand on my arm. Then I looked up into her desperate eyes. I pulled my arm away. I did not do it roughly, but I did it with a heavy finality that stopped her dead in her tracks. I looked at her, and then at my father standing silently, uselessly behind her. I searched my heart for anger. I searched for hatred. But I felt absolutely nothing. Just a vast, empty space where a daughter's love and obligation used to reside. You did know, I said. My voice was incredibly quiet, but it was unyielding. You might not have seen that specific video, Harriet. But you knew exactly who he was. You knew he was a liar. You knew he was selfish. You knew he abandoned his terrified children in a rainstorm and never once looked back. You knew all of that for 12 long years. And you actively chose him anyway. You always chose him. We are your family, Genevieve, my father mumbled weakly, the words sounding incredibly hollow and pathetic echoing in the large marble hall. I looked at the 4 incredible, resilient, beautiful people standing firmly with me. Callahan, strong and steady. Blythe, fierce and fiercely loyal. Gideon and Odessa, looking up at me with an absolute, unconditional trust that humbled me to my very core. No, I said, my voice clear and ringing with absolute truth for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. This right here is my family. And they are waiting for me. We are going home. And with that final sentence, I completely turned my back on the two people who gave me life. I walked toward the four people to whom I had dedicated my entire life. We walked together out the heavy glass doors and into the bright, blinding sunshine, leaving the toxic ghosts of our past behind us in the cold, dark hallway of the courthouse forever. The 6 months that followed the brutal trial were like stepping out of a dark, windowless basement directly into the full, brilliant light of a summer day. It was almost disorienting at first. The silence in our large house was completely different. It was no longer the heavy, incredibly anxious silence of waiting for the next legal threat or the next manipulative phone call from a relative. It was a deeply peaceful, highly contented silence. The kind of absolute peace that comes from knowing, deep down in your very bones, that you are finally, permanently safe. The dark cloud of uncertainty that had hung over our heads for 12 years had finally lifted. It was burned away by the harsh, sanitizing glare of the truth. It was replaced by the bright, clear sky of a future we could actually plan for without constant, gnawing fear. The change in the kids was the most remarkable, beautiful thing to witness. It was as if a massive, invisible weight of lead had been lifted directly from their young shoulders. Blythe started playing her acoustic guitar on the porch again. But the melodies that now filled the warm evening air were not the melancholic, questioning tunes of before. They were incredibly upbeat, hopeful chords. They were songs about new beginnings, open roads, and bright futures. Gideon, who had grown very quiet and withdrawn during the intense, terrifying stress of the legal battle, entirely rediscovered his boisterous, funny self. His loud, unrestrained laughter once again became the wonderful daily soundtrack of our home. Odessa, my sweet, highly sensitive youngest girl, seemed to smile so much more. It was a genuine, completely carefree smile that reached all the way up to her eyes and lit up her whole face. She started sleeping through the night again. The terrible nightmares of the bad man taking her away permanently vanished. The biggest, most profound transformation, however, was in Callahan. The incredibly angry, defensive armor he had worn tightly around himself for months, a heavy shield against the cruel world and his own internal pain, began to fall away piece by piece. One sunny afternoon, he came into the kitchen where I was sketching out some preliminary design ideas for a small home extension. It was a fun project I could finally afford to actually think about, now that the massive threat of losing the house and my savings was entirely gone. He was holding an open, official-looking letter in his hand. "I got in," he said. His voice was thick with a heavy mixture of absolute disbelief and immense pride. The paid internship program at the big architectural firm downtown. The one I really thought I had absolutely no chance in hell at getting. I instantly dropped my pencil. I stood up and wrapped him in a fierce, incredibly tight hug. My heart was swelling with a pride that was so intense it was almost physically painful. They would be absolute, complete fools not to take you, Callahan. You are the most talented, hard-working young designer I know. He pulled back slightly. His eyes were shining with unshed tears. "I put your name down on the application essay," he said very quietly, his gaze incredibly steady on mine. "Under the application question asking, 'Who is your greatest inspiration?' I wrote an entire essay about you. I wrote about how you proved to me that the best, most enduring, strongest structures in this world are not built with cold steel and fragile glass. They are built with deep sacrifice, daily consistency, and unconditional love." We just stood there in the warm kitchen for a long, quiet moment. We were two people who had been violently forged into a mother and a son, not by biology, but by the intense, shared fires of massive adversity. It was a perfect, crystalline moment. A quiet, beautiful testament to everything we had fought so incredibly hard for, and everything we had won. Our lives were rapidly moving forward. We were not just surviving anymore. We were actively healing. We were building. Our old family, however, was in a state of rapid, incredibly irreversible decay. Word trickled back to us through the busy town grapevine, which was absolutely buzzing with the highly salacious, dramatic details of our exposed court case. My parents, Harriet and Winston, had rapidly become social pariahs in our community. Their frantic attempts to spin the story after the trial, claiming I had somehow hired a professional actor to completely fake the video of Vance, had backfired spectacularly. It made them look not only incredibly malicious but also completely foolish. Their powerful, wealthy friends from the local country club and the various hospital charity galas now actively avoided them in public. Their phone calls went entirely unanswered. They had built their entire, fragile lives on a foundation of fake image and public reputation, and now that foundation had completely turned to shifting sand beneath their feet. Vance, we heard through the same gossip channels, had quickly left town in the middle of the night. He completely packed up and moved to Colorado. But his terrible reputation, highly amplified by the internet and public court records, easily followed him. The story, in its raw, dramatic, terrible detail, was the exact kind of thing that spreads like an uncontrollable wildfire online. He absolutely could not outrun the recorded truth of his own cruel words. He had permanently lost his children, his fraudulent claim to the inheritance, his parents' financial support, and any tiny shred of human dignity he had left. One crisp autumn evening, about 8 months after the trial ended, I was standing at the kitchen counter sorting through the Daily Mail. Bills, junk mail flyers, a nice postcard from Maria on vacation. Then, I saw it. It was a flimsy, cheap envelope with a smudged postmark from Denver, Colorado. The handwriting on the front was loopy, dramatic, and instantly, sickeningly recognizable. It was Vance. My very first instinct was to walk directly to the living room, throw it in the fireplace completely unopened, and watch it burn. Let the toxic poison it undoubtedly contained turn to useless ash before it could infect the incredible peace of our home. But a morbid, highly clinical kind of curiosity got the better of me. I really had to know. I had to see the absolute final, pathetic chapter of this ridiculous story. I slid my finger under the flap and opened it. The letter was absolutely not an apology. It was not a desperate plea for forgiveness. It was not an expression of deep remorse for the immense pain he had caused. It was 3 full pages of rambling, highly delusional, self-pitying nonsense about how he had been terribly wronged by the justice system. He complained about how the entire world was unfairly against him. He ridiculously claimed the video was a deep fake, a cruel, illegal trick engineered by a highly jealous Nadine to ruin his life. He painted himself as a deeply misunderstood, tragic artist, a free spirit who had been violently crushed by a conventional, highly judgmental world. Then came the final paragraph. The part that truly, genuinely took my breath away with its sheer, unmitigated, galactic-level audacity. I know you completely won in court, Genevieve. But you absolutely cannot deny my blood right as their true father and our parents' only son. I am in a bit of a severe financial bind right now out here, as starting over is so terribly expensive, and my creativity is being completely stifled by immense financial stress. As my sister, and as the person living comfortably in our large family home, it is only fair and right that you help me out right now. I was thinking a simple loan of $30,000 would be a very good start to show the world that there are no hard feelings between us, and that you are finally willing to help your real family heal. I read that paragraph twice. Then I read it a third time just to make absolutely sure I was not actively hallucinating. A loan. $30,000. No hard feelings. The sheer, incredibly narcissistic delusion of it was almost comical. After absolutely everything he had done. After the immense, crushing pain he had intentionally inflicted on 4 innocent children. After aggressively trying to strip me of my home, my salary, and my children in a court of law. His only thought, his very first impulse, was still entirely about himself. About getting money. About what he falsely believed he was owed. I did not feel any anger reading it. I did not feel a burning rage. I did not feel anything at all. He was just a complete stranger to me now. A pathetic, highly selfish stranger who would absolutely never, ever learn, and never, ever change. I calmly walked out of the kitchen and over to the living room fireplace, where a low, pleasant fire was happily crackling, warding off the cool evening chill. I looked at the 3 pages of paper one last time. I stared at the looping, completely self-absorbed script that had caused so much unnecessary pain in our lives. Then, I casually dropped it directly into the orange flames. I stood there and watched as the sharp edges of the paper quickly curled. I watched them turn a dark brown, and then a brittle black. I watched as his highly toxic words, his endless, pathetic excuses, and his completely bottomless greed turned into absolutely nothing more than gray smoke and harmless ash floating up the chimney. And as the very last corner of the paper was completely consumed by the bright fire, I felt the final, lingering, heavy chain to my incredibly toxic past permanently break and turn to dust. I was finally, completely, unconditionally free. Tonight, the air outside is cool and smells heavily like fresh rain. It smells almost exactly like it did on that terrible Tuesday afternoon all those 12 years ago. But this time, there is absolutely no dark storm brewing on the horizon. There is just the gentle, highly rhythmic sound of the water sprinklers sweeping across the green lawn, and the warm, incredibly inviting glow of the string lights I recently hung up across the backyard patio. From my comfortable chair on the wooden deck, I can clearly see inside the house through the large glass sliding doors of the kitchen. Callahan is home for the weekend from his busy downtown internship. He is patiently, carefully teaching Gideon how to properly sear a thick steak in a cast iron pan, creating a delicious-smelling cloud of smoke that wafts outside into the cool air. Blythe is standing at the island counter, expertly arranging a massive, colorful salad in a wooden bowl. Her cell phone is propped up against a glass, loudly playing a new, beautiful song she has recently written and recorded. Odessa is carefully setting the large dining table. Her movements are no longer those of a clumsy, frightened child, but the movements of a highly graceful, deeply confident young woman. They are all laughing loudly about a terrible joke Gideon just told. Their distinct voices are perfectly mingling together into a completely effortless, beautiful symphony of true belonging. This specific sound. This exact, warm scene. This is the incredible sound of my life's absolute greatest project. This is my beautiful masterpiece. For so incredibly long, for so many hard, exhausting years, I falsely thought my family had been violently taken from me. I deeply mourned the painful loss of a brother, a mother, and a father. In the quiet, lonely hours of the night, I would sometimes feel the heavy phantom limb of a completely different life I was originally supposed to have. The life where I was not suddenly a single mother of 4 at 23 years old. The life where I was designing tall glass skyscrapers in Chicago instead of building elaborate, messy forts out of couch cushions in my living room. But sitting right here now, watching them smile, I completely realize the profound, undeniable truth of my entire life. I did not lose a family. I was given the incredibly rare, highly difficult, and entirely beautiful chance to build a real one completely from scratch. I learned the hard way that a family is absolutely not about the shared blood running in your veins. It is not about a shared last name written on a legal piece of paper. It is entirely about the shared, difficult moments in your life. It is about exactly who physically shows up when the dark storm finally hits. It is about exactly who stays behind to help you clean up the massive, terrible mess. It is about the highly deliberate, completely conscious, daily choice to actively love someone day in and day out, even when it is incredibly hard. Especially when it is incredibly hard. My parents and Vance were tightly bound to me by blood. But they were absolute strangers to the true meaning of the word family. Me and these 4 incredible, resilient humans were bound together by something so much infinitely stronger. We are tightly bound by patched-up scraped knees and softly whispered bedtime stories. We are bound by stressful parent-teacher conferences and highly terrifying late-night driving lessons. We are permanently bound by our shared, heavy grief and our ultimately triumphant joy. We are a beautiful family forged entirely in the hot fire, and the deep bonds we share are completely unbreakable. The neat blueprint of my life changed irrevocably 12 years ago. The quiet future I had so meticulously designed for myself was permanently erased in a single, rainy afternoon. But the incredibly strong structure I built in its place is far stronger, infinitely more beautiful, and filled with vastly more love than I ever could have possibly imagined in my wildest dreams. I am absolutely not the woman I originally thought I would be. I am something so much more. I am a mother. And that is an incredible title I have truly earned. A beautiful title I will deeply cherish for the entire rest of my days.